On this episode of Wheat's on Your Mind, we continue our conversation with Romulo Lollato, K-State Extension wheat production specialist, about his background from Brazil and his current perspective on wheat research and wheat extension in Kansas. We'll talk about what Romulo's vision is for the future of wheat in Kansas on this episode of Wheat's on Your Mind. Your first trip around the state of Kansas, what were your expectations and what were the realities that you encountered?
So the first trip that I've done was actually before jumping in the job, right? Was that one that we did on the wheat quality tour. So it was a very intense wheat experience. I know that during that year, the wheat was going through a severe drought, very, very severe drought. But whenever we were doing the wheat quality kickoff meeting in Manhattan in that early May, there was floods going on.
I remember that, yeah.
Right, and so I saw that as a good sign. And we were using rubber boots throughout that entire trip, right? So that was a 3-day trip around the state, stopping in 80 or 100 wheat fields. Well, with you guys, you're overachievers, so we probably stopped in 25 fields per day or so. But it was excellent. I really enjoyed getting to know the wheat quality tour. Has a very different crowd, right? With a lot of people involved in the wheat industry, but perhaps a lot of people who didn't, had never been in a wheat field. So that gave me the opportunity to do some sort of education already there, right? And it just reinforced that I was on the right path.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about Paraná and Brazil and the diversity of the state of Kansas, soil types, climates. How would you compare it to where you grew up?
So Kansas is a natural laboratory, right? It's a
great way to put it. Yeah.
Open air laboratory here because you have this huge gradient in precipitation, right? East to west. You have gradients in temperature as well. If you go from southeast to northwest, you have soil types that go from sandy soils to nice silt loam soils that can hold a couple inches of water per foot. And so that was very attractive to me as well, because when you're writing, you're trying to convince somebody to give you money to make something, to learn something. You can simply put that you have all these different conditions that you're going to do that testing at, right? So that was very attractive to me. I said, well, in 1 year, you can actually get a lot of different seasons there, just with the difference in weather and the different soil that you have. So a lot of variability. Now, it's not to say that the state where I come from didn't have variability. There was, perhaps not as evident in rainfall, but there was variability because of different elevations that we have and different soil types as well. As you go west, and you're nearing the border with Paraguay and Argentina there, we have better soils, a little bit less rainfall as well, warmer temperatures. So the system there, they will usually do a summer crop soybeans, followed by a second season corn, a safrinha corn. Where I'm from, we cannot do that. It's too cold in the winter to do a second season of corn, so we do either corn or soybeans as our major summer crop, followed by a spring wheat crop. So there is variability in the state. As you go to the northeast part of the state, a lot more sandier soils. That's where you have more sugar cane, some peanuts come in as well, and we have cattle all over. So there is variability. Maybe not as extreme as what we have in Kansas, but there's variability. Yeah.
That was going to be my next word, is extreme. So between Oklahoma and Kansas, you've been in the central U.S. for 10 plus years now. You've seen 20 below temperatures, tornadoes, drought, dust storms. Does it give you a better appreciation for winter wheat?
It definitely does for winter wheat and for the farmers in this region as well, and how tough and resilient they need to be to make through these conditions. You forgot to mention, you said negative 20 there, followed by a positive 30 the next day or a positive 70 in the next day or something, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, the 30 I was thinking in Celsius here, but yeah, exactly. So a huge variability, not only within the state, but for the same region within the year and within just a few days apart. So I've learned that there's no season alike for wheat, and so I've been constantly learning for the last 7 years here, and I get questions, what is this going to do to the crop? Well, let's learn. Right, let's learn together, because every year we have new challenges, and growers just need to make through them, and makes me appreciate not only winter wheat but growers in this region as well.
For a researcher that likes data and variability, you're like a kid in a candy store in the central United States with winter wheat, I suppose.
I have to admit that I probably spend more time in research than I should. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate it. So what is it that, that you think the U.S. farmer has, especially in the central U.S., that the characteristic that makes them able to survive all of this? What have you learned about them?
I'm still trying to figure that out. I don't know that I can pinpoint that, but they're just the folks. Yeah, they're there, and they manage to keep their good humor, even though all this stuff is going on. It's incredible. Yeah, I don't know that I can pinpoint that yet.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure working for farmers, but to be one, I still haven't figured it out either. But so, what are some of the advantages that U.S. farmers have over Brazilian farmers, and disadvantages that U.S. farmers might have?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I think about that, perhaps the biggest advantage that the U.S. farmers would have compared to the farmers in Brazil would be access to credit.
Oh, okay.
Right. I mean, I think that there are government programs that perhaps help farmers more often here, and they have perhaps access to credit with lower cost than what Brazilian farmers would have. Over there is just extremely expensive, and if you get a loan there, you're going to it's tough. Even though there are a few very localized programs that every now and then the government puts out for farmers to access machinery and things like this, when one of those comes around, you need to take advantage of it because you don't know when the next one comes around. Okay. So just access to credit is a big thing here as compared to there, and so I think that this allows growers here to, for the most part, keep the farm up in terms of machinery and things like this, more up to date than there. Insurance as well. I think that insurance is a big difference.
Crop insurance. Yeah.
Crop insurance. Yeah. Over there, there is the option, of course, to get crop insurance, but we usually say that if you do that, you're going to work to pay for the insurance, pretty much. So every farmer, whenever they have the chance to be independent from crop insurance and just take the risk on his own or her own, that's the preferred route there. And it took my father a few years to be that way, but the first year that he could do that, he didn't go back to crop insurance ever, because those were his words. You're working to pay for that. So those would, I think, would be two big advantages that the farmer has here as compared to farmers there. Now, if we look at just technology adoption, right, and I don't think there is an advantage here or there in terms, if you look at the big farms, right, the farms who are actually top-notch in adopting the most up-to-date technology and things like this, they will be very comparable, right? The farmer here will have all the tools and all the advantages, and the farmer there will have as well. Now, an average size or small size farmers who may not have access to or volume, right, would be in a disadvantage there just because of lack of credit and things along these lines. Perhaps in terms of advantages there, I would say it's more related to the natural conditions, right, weather conditions that we have. If you're growing soybeans where every day 5 p.m. you get a 1-inch shower, that's really good. That's really good. Well, it depends, right? You need to be able to harvest it as well. But I mean, in general, you understand. I think that weather conditions would probably be a big advantage there. From natural conditions, a big advantage here would be mostly soils.
Oh.
Right? Our soils in Brazil, they are very oxidized, very old soils. They have been washed out over hundreds of years, and so a lot of acidity, a lot of aluminum in the soils. And somebody might say, well, our soils here are becoming acid too. Well, but they're not naturally acidic, right? You have a topsoil acidity here that you very easily fix with lime, whereas there we have subsoil.
Oh.
So the deeper you go, they're very deep soils, right? They might have 20, 30 yards, or depending where you go, they're very deep soils. but they get more acid the deeper you go. So that really can restrict root growth there. So that's a big challenge, to manage that, because you're wanting to combine no-till technology, which you're not supposed to incorporate anything, with a subsoil acidity where you need to incorporate lime.
Right.
And so that's a big challenge that growers have there, is just managing soil and soil fertility as a whole because of these natural, very oxidized conditions that we have.
Do they inject liquid lime into the subsoil, or how do they do that?
No, usually, they try to work with just surface application of lime. If they have been under no-till for a number of years, they will try all that they can not to break that soil. So try to do surface application of lime, and with the amount of rainfall that we have there, some lime goes down the profile, not as much as they would like, and not as uniform as what we would need. There's been some studies also showing that some cover crops that you can plant in the winter, they might help with the movement of that lime, right? They might release some chemicals from their leaves whenever there's some rainfall that will tie up those calcium carbonate particles and bring them down the profile and help with that distribution. But overall, we're still relying a lot on Mother Nature. So,
What about input cost? Are they comparable between Brazil and here?
a few times when I try to compare the budgets, I think that, yes, once you make the conversion, everything is based on the dollar, right? And so that affects us as well. Whenever the dollar is very strong, it's good when you're selling the product, but things also become more expensive. And so in terms of input costs, I think we'll be fairly similar. Yeah, I may be off here. I haven't looked at it in a while, but the few times that I looked at crop budgets here and there, they were fairly comparable.
Yeah,
with the exception of disease control.
Yeah,
right. In Brazil, if you don't take care of disease control, it just it takes your crop.
Yeah,
I'll give you the example. When we were growing soybeans in our own farm, 4 to 5 applications of fungicide were norm.
Wow.
You go to Mato Grosso, those guys were looking at 8 to 9 applications of fungicide in the season.
Mm-hmm.
So those costs really go up in a hurry. But that will be perhaps the major difference there. Yeah.
For spring wheat in South Brazil, I mean, how do the genetics compare to here? I mean, is there any focus on building in resistance, disease resistance into those genetics, just like there is here?
There is. In fact, we have a few different breeding programs that are government-led, like some by government institutions, but probably today the spring wheat market in Brazil is 85% is in the hands of one company. Mm-hmm. That company is called Biotrigo, and they work a lot with K-State, actually.
Right.
Yep, they work a lot, doing many screenings and things like this here at K-State. Actually, one of the owners of the company is a graduate from Alan Fritz here at K-State. Okay. And the other one got his PhD in breeding in, I believe it was Idaho State. So both of them did their PhD here in the U.S. and they went back and opened the company, and they have 80+% of the market share today. So they're doing really well, and I know that they have a strong program looking at disease resistance there as well. They have a dedicated plant pathologist, plus 3 or 4 wheat breeders, and so it's a very nice company right now with a big structure, and they are growing. So they have been focusing on that. I think they made good strides in terms of decreasing fungicide reliance. But as a Brazilian farmer, I know that we still need to be on the lookout. Can't just turn it off.
So we've talked about how in both countries farmers are quick adopters of new technology. So we all know the challenges facing farmers here in Kansas and in Brazil and worldwide. But speaking in terms of technology, what do you see in the next 10 to 20 years in terms of technology that is going to be of the most benefit to wheat farmers?
I think, that's a tough one. And I think right now the biggest opportunity that I see is the amount of data that is being collected by these different technologies being adopted by the growers. Mm-hmm. Once we find a way to really make good use of that data, right, I think that's where the biggest opportunity lies. I don't know that I can pinpoint a given technology like green seeker usage for nitrogen nutrition or anything like that, but I think is understanding the data that we have, right? With the advent of precision ag and the amount of soil sampling that we've done over the years, the amount of yield maps that we have available today, more and more digital agriculture connecting all the dots, and so linking every single operation the growers are doing in the field. How can we actually learn from all of that together? I think in the future, that's where I would put my eggs in that basket, is like data. There are many things to be figured out, right? Who owns the data? Who can use the data? What type of data agreements we need to have, and how do we make sure that the farmers are the ones benefiting from that? But once all those are figured out, I think that's where the biggest opportunity lies.
Yeah, I like to compare crop production to weather prediction. I guess the more data you collect, the more predictability there is. And even with as many variables as there are in farming in Kansas, wheat and beyond, do you think we can see some point where there is certainly a little bit more predictability based on where you're growing the wheat, what your soil conditions are? What do you think if you had to dream on predictability for these types of things?
Yeah, I think you're spot on the track that you're going there, and honestly, that has been changing the way that we do research as well. Mm-hmm. Right? I guess in the past, and even in my own program up to date, what we do is, we have these ideas of things that can impact yield. We go out and we put it in research trials all over the state. Well, we do all over the state. Many guys just do in their own backyard, and just one point in time. What can we really learn out of that? We're trying to do as many places as we can, but even there, we got in 10, 12 locations. That's what we can handle, right? Every year, and so it's a limited amount of data that we can collect on purpose like that. Well, let's establish these trials. Let's collect this data. Let's learn from it. The more we can do, my own program currently is about 6,000 data points a year, right? Which is really good. But think about how many farmers are out there and how many farmers are using at least yield maps or combines that give them yield maps. And then can we link that back to the operations that have been done and to the soil types that we have detailed maps from? And so, I think that's where the biggest opportunity lies, and predictability in the future as well. I hope in the near future we can learn and say, if you have this soil type based on hundreds of thousands of fields that we looked at in Kansas, right? Just let's try and grow this variety here with this management practice. But again, that's not because we did a replicated trial that told us that. It's because we learned from data coming from hundreds of thousands of commercial fields that's telling us that.
But it truly is layers of data. I mean, what you've talked about, getting data from hundreds of thousands of fields, you still have to layer a whole nother set of weather data on top of that to add to that predictability. It almost makes the head spin. When you start going over it, right, you have the data that farmers are collecting. That's what can we learn from that? But for us to really learn, you need the weather data. Mm-hmm. You need the soil data. Right. And you need, when I talk about farmer data, you have, maps for planting rates and fertility rates and yield maps and soil types. And so there are dozens of layers that we need to combine. And so developing analytical ability is where I think the future of ag research lies. Yeah. Well, I'll really put you on the spot here then. So what do you think wheat's true potential is, winter wheat in the central United States? I think we've kind of, in the past years demonstrated what the yield potential is, but overall in terms of potential of yield and quality and diversity, what do you think is the true potential of wheat?
So let's first define what potential is, right? A crop yield potential is how much that crop can yield under non-limiting management conditions. Okay. We're babysitting it, right? We're giving it everything that it needs. There's no fertility limitations, not even micronutrients, nothing, no fertility limitations. There's no disease or no insect limitation. There's only limited by radiation, how much sunlight's coming down, temperature, are we having heat stress or not, or are we having cold stress, and water. Right? How much water is limiting our yields. So if we look at wheat grown in New Zealand, where they can not only babysit the crop, but the weather also babysits the crop. Right? So they have almost perfect conditions. We have north of 200 bushels per acre being in yield contest there. I believe 219 is the newest record, something along those lines. So really is a corn type of yield, right? Now, we need to keep in mind a few things. Again, in this case, management was absolutely non-limiting. Weather was also probably non-limiting at all either. And that's a forage wheat. The protein is quite low, right? Let's break that part by part. Once we bring the crop to the Great Plains here, first thing that we change is the weather.
Yeah, and you've done some research on this to know exactly what percent the weather is, and it's quite a bit different than New Zealand.
It is. It's huge. And so right there, we probably bring that potential down maybe in half or something like that, just because we're not going to have all the rainfall that we need. We're going to have heat stress during grain filling. That's going to be huge, right? We might have some freeze damage here and there as well. So there's just so many variables that impact that, even if our growers want to manage it 100%, which is not economical, right? We're not recommending that. It's not economical.
Right.
But if we wanted to do that and irrigate our crop, right, year in, year out, the studies that we've done show that if you're irrigating, so there's no water limitation, our potential is still about 115 bushels per acre or so, year in, year out. There are years we're going to harvest 135, but there are years that even if you give everything, it's going to be hot, you're going to harvest 75, right? Now, only 5% of Kansas wheat is irrigated. So let's take that out of the equation, and let's just look at dry land, right? Once you put water deficit stress there, year in, year out as well, we bring that down to about 70 to 75 bushels per acre. So, in other words, if our growers will do everything that they can to keep the crop at the best, right, that's about our long-term potential. If you look at the last 30 years, that has been the potential that the weather gave us. Now, is that economical? It's probably not, right? It's not economical for you to reach for the highest yields that you can. You need to find that optimum spot, which is usually about 75% of that potential.
Okay.
Right, so if 70 to 75 bushels is our potential on the long term, and we are interested in being economical and making a profit out of it, we're looking at 75% of that. We're probably looking at a long-term average, maybe 60, 62 bushels per acre at the state of Kansas for us to be economical and produce more with the current genetics, right? And so we are at 49, 50 average last few years. So it means that we could be a good 10 bushels ahead and still making more money than we are today. So there's definitely a big gap there of what our current genetics can offer versus where we are. And that's management, right? That's agronomy that we need to be paying attention. Planting date, where can we actually put, when should we actually be planting the crop to ensure it's going to get not only good conditions through the winter, but also not be too late, heading later on, be more exposed to heat stress, management of pests and diseases, that has been a big issue recently, fertility management, and so on. So many things that we need to fine-tune, but I believe that, looking at 60, 62 bushels per acre state average is still realistic for us to be making more money than we are today.
Well, that is a great perspective and a great goal to shoot for, and it's refreshing to hear, maybe we don't need to maximize for the maximum yield. We have to have sustainability economically, too. That's a key part of it. So management for yield and management for quality. I often say wheat has been around for thousands of years, but the new frontier right now is for us figuring out this whole wheat protein game. And, quality and quantity and agronomics, I think you would say, is a huge part of that also.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also a huge part of what brings our potential down compared to forage wheat in New Zealand, right? Protein is expensive to produce. If you're a plant, it costs a lot to produce protein as compared to producing starch, right? And so if you're wanting to produce 12, 13% protein wheat, that's going to cost a lot more than producing 7% protein forage wheat, right? And so that's a big piece there of limiting our yield potential as compared to what they have in other parts, even if you compare to Michigan or something like this where they're growing soft wheat. But for our conditions here in Kansas, yeah, I agree. We have a lot of information that we developed over the years on how do we manage the crop, not only for yield, but for the quality piece as well. It comes down a lot to fertility management, and not only amount, but timing as well. And so there's a lot of different pieces there. But yes, we are showing that we can increase not only yields, but our protein content as well. Now, for growers to do that, there needs to be some compensation, right? Some financial compensation for them to go after that, right? Otherwise, if there's no compensation, they should be shooting for 11.5 protein between 11.5 and 12. At that point, we know yields are not limiting by lack of nitrogen, and so they're not exporting excessive nitrogen from their fields. Now, they're getting paid for 13 plus protein or 12 plus protein or something like that. We're definitely developing information on how we can get there.
Yeah. So what have you found out in terms of protein quality versus quantity and micronutrients? What have you discovered, and what do we not know yet? The not know is the easy part, I guess.
Yeah, well, we recently have a student who we did a project where he looked at global literature, right? He went across hundreds of papers that have been published over the years, and we're just interested in that late season nitrogen application, right? Because we get a lot of questions there. Should I add to my fungicide, right? 5-10 pounds of N there when I'm doing my fungicide application. So we are wanting to answer that question. And what we found was very, very consistent in that there's no yield benefit at all. That late in the game, your yield potential has been defined, right? So you're putting 5-10 units more of nitrogen. It's not going to do anything to your yield. But it will bring your protein up a good half point or so on average. You can bring more if you're putting more nitrogen out. So if we are interested in going that route, that time, that application for doing a fungicide application already, it's, and you might get paid for protein. That's one recommendation that we have. Kind of that late season boot type of nitrogen application for those guys going after protein. Now, before we get there as well, all of the baseline fertility, right? Just having enough nitrogen to max out not only your yield, but also your protein as well. Some of the research were showing that, the plant takes up about 2.3 to 2.4 pounds of N for every bushel produced at about 11% protein, 11.5% protein. If we want to go to that 12% protein, right, usually the plant's taking up now about 2.6 pounds for every bushel produced. Right, so it's math, right? You need more nitrogen taken up by the plant to put not only yield but protein as well. And to some extent, if we want to take that late season decision, growers can sample the flag leaf as soon as it's out, send it out to the lab and see what's the nitrogen percent on it. If it's less than about 3% or so, and they want in protein, it would be worth probably putting out that late season land. So we're trying to develop some of those recommendations, right? Of course, that is going to be specific to every region, right? A grower that has a long-term fertility program might not need that late season N, but most of the growers who are managing fertility crop after crop for that crop specifically can use those tools as well. So
what do you learn from farmers in your research? I mean, obviously you're learning a lot from the data you're collecting, but what do you learn for farmers, and how do you apply that to your research?
Well, that's one of the most fun part of my work is actually learning from farmers, right? If you think a farmer is out there doing his thing, right, and working on a tractor, and many times just listening to different podcasts like this one, and they think a lot, right? They think a lot, and they come up with some questions that sometimes you have no idea where that question came from, or how to answer that.
Yeah.
Right. And so that interaction with farmers gives me actually a lot of questions to answer in my own research program. right? I came across a farmer who was, saving his seed for 15 years. What's that going to do to the seed quality? Right? We have a very, very good idea of that, but let's test. Let me get a hold of some of that seed. Let's test it out.
Yeah.
Right? And so, just questions that come up from farmers, they really run a large portion of my applied program.
Mm-hmm.
We are doing 80, 90 extension programs every year where we're face-to-face with growers, and in each one of those we might have 3, 4, 5, 10 questions coming up. Some of those we'll have no idea how to answer, and then that's where we come back to the research program. So that's one way that I'm learning from farmers, just like what they are asking me, right? Another way is like trying to work with them and get data from their own production fields and analyze that set of data for them. Just so for example, we finished a project with the Kansas Wheat Commission here that we went out and we interviewed farmers, right? Had the student just sit down with farmers, and again, farmers being welcoming as they are, many times we're in their own house just having a cup of coffee, right? And go over a questionnaire of how farmers were managing their own crops. Mm-hmm. So that gave us a very rich database that we're going to be taking advantage of for years to come in terms of what can we learn from that database. Okay, growers that are using fungicide versus those that aren't. Growers who are using higher seeding rates versus those that are using lower. And so we can start asking these specific questions from this data that we've collected in the past and just learning from there as well. How are those interaction with management practices impacting yields on commercial wheat fields around Kansas, just from what farmers told us that they are doing? That
curiosity has to be pretty motivating for you in your work.
It definitely is, and it was pretty scary as well, especially in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
I remember I jumped in K-State, and I started on a Monday, and then Alan Fritz, he had something going on that he had for the next Monday. He had scheduled a pre-plant meeting, mm-hmm. but something came up and he wasn't going to be able to make it, right? Instead of canceling, he just put me on the spot, right?
Yeah.
A week on the job, and there I went, and I remember the first question this was in McPherson County, and the first question that I got there from a farmer was, okay, what about insecticide seed treatments? Are they worth it?
Yeah.
I have no idea how to respond to that at that point in time, right? I had no data. It was my first week on the job. My PhD, I was so deep into the yield potential thing that I hadn't looked at seed treatments in a long time, and but that's the type of that's the type of thing that makes extension fun. It's just like those challenges that maybe at that point you don't have the information, you know where to get it, so that made me go back and give him that answer within the next day, right? Because that answer was there. But, just like being brand new on the job, that was one of the challenges that got me and that keeps me motivated to date. So,
do you remember your first spring field day?
I do. It was in Isabel.
It
was in Isabel, yeah. And I left pretty early, right? Because that's a good 3.5 hour drive or something from Manhattan. And I remember that I had recorded the characteristics of each variety in my phone so I could go listen to it as I was driving, right? And so when I got there, I had it all in my mind, and I think it went really well, because then one of the growers said that it was one of the best that he had, and that made me super happy, right? It made me, okay, well, so this is a good strategy, right? Because at that point, I mean, you have so many varieties, it's impossible for you to know them all by detail, right? So I remember going and listening to that, for 3.5 hours, and then put that out in 30, 40 minutes, right? Because that's how long it was worth. But at least, that's it's a lot of fun, just interacting.
No one's ever going to question your preparatory work, but that was going to be my question for you. As you got to that first field day, and did you know every variety and every detail about that?
Well, lucky enough, it was in Isabel, which is pretty close to Oklahoma. So I had been in Oklahoma for a good 5 years, right? And so Ruby Lee and Double Stop and Iba and Gallagher, those were on top of in the tip of my tongue, right? Yeah. Because I had been working with those for a number of years. Many of them I kind of had to, of course, keep in mind and memorize some things, and because I didn't know them very well, I remember some of those stem varieties that make their way out there, but they're not as widely used, at least in the research that I was doing in Oklahoma at the time, were some of them. Luckily, it wasn't somewhere in Northwest Kansas that was like just completely different set of varieties than the ones that I was more used to. But yeah, so it's been a learning process, of course, and we have such a good support in Northwest Kansas with Lucas Hack there and with Jeannie Falk Jones as well, and all their knowledge that made that transition much easier because they could take care of a lot of it, and I had time to learn that as well.
Well, so let's look ahead 30 years, 40 years when Romulo is retired. What would you like to look back and say you accomplished both with research and extension in your career? Hopefully all of it at K-State.
Well, I think it's all a continuum, right? Back in my PhD, I figured out, okay, what's the size of the gap that we have? How much can we grow more and still being economically sustainable, right? I think that the last 7 years or so, we've been working towards that, right? And our average yields have been increasing in Kansas. I think that's good. Of course, last year was complicated because of the drought. Yeah. Some things we cannot control. But overall, we're a higher average today than we were 7, 8, 10 years ago. So that's very reassuring to me that we are on the right track. Things have been changing, right? I think that that's still my priority and is going to be my priority in terms of how can growers get to that 60, 62 consistently. But with the way that things are shaping out in the market and industry and everything, we have now more concerns, environmental concerns, human and social and things like these. So other domains that that's not only agronomic anymore, right? I think that the agronomy needs to be there, but we need to also develop information. Okay, if we're doing these agronomic practices, how's the environment going to look like, right? How is your economic, of course, and go as far as how's that impacting your social, right? Your community around you, creating jobs and things like this. So if I would fantasize here on 30 years down the road and looking back how things should look, is that we got there, that we may be consistently averaging that 60, 62 or so, and that we have also shown that we can get there and still be environmentally friendly, right? Because a higher yielding crop is going to be a more efficient crop, right? And maybe it takes a little bit more fertilizer to get there, but by unit fertilizer, we're being more efficient. And so overall, environmentally, that's good, right? And that growers are making more money by doing that as well, right? And that we're putting out good quality wheat for the bread production because we need to make a loaf of bread, right? We can't be producing 62 bushel per acre at a 9% protein, right? We need to keep that 10, 12% protein. And then hopefully these things that are more tangible from my perspective can also help the social component of small communities in rural Kansas and help with the development of them, creating jobs and things like this, whether it is by, a niche market that is going to help growers capitalize and also capitalize itself based on high quality wheat or traceability of wheat or something like this, right? So hopefully that's what we look back and see. It's like, okay, well, we achieved the yield that we wanted to and that we thought was possible, and we're being responsible when doing that.
Well, that's a great vision. You've certainly put some thought into that. So let's wrap this up with some rapid fire questions. Are you ready for this? I may put you on the spot a little bit. So what's the favorite part of your job?
Working with growers.
What's the least favorite part of your job?
The financials, just reporting everything that we need to report every month and doing those credit card statements that I drag that every month.
What's your favorite part, research or extension?
They are a cycle. They go together. I learn what I need. I learn my questions from extension. I respond them on my research, and then I need to bring them back to growers. Otherwise, they're going to be on a shelf. They are a cycle.
Have you seen more of the United States or more of Brazil?
I think that I'm pretty even, but probably leaning towards more of the U.S. I've traveled quite a bit around here in the last 12 years that I've been around. A lot of it was tourist. A lot of it was working as well. So I think I'm leaning towards the U.S. there.
Do you still feel the pull to maybe someday go back home to Brazil?
That pool, I don't think it's ever going to go away, right? Being where I'm from and being where my roots are and where my family is, I think that pool is something that I have to learn to live with if my goal is to keep living here. And I think that I made a good headway there in the last 12 years or so.
Would you like to see your daughter, Emma, grow up to be an agronomist?
Oh, I don't know about that. I probably have higher expectations for her. No, yeah. She loves to sing. Maybe she'll do that, but she's 2 years old. So
yeah, well,
that's what she knows how to do. So.
Let's not put that much pressure on her yet. So, well, anything else, Romulo, that you wanted to bring up, or maybe that we haven't talked about?
I just wanted to wrap up saying how much I appreciate working with you guys. Working with the Kansas Wheat Commission has been big part of my work that I enjoy with, right? I guess that's when I say your first rapid question, what I like the most of my job when I said working with growers, that's of course a big part of it, right? I think that I found in you guys here a lot of support for the research that I think it's valuable, and I also see that you guys value it and give me back your ideas and your critique and your feedback, and that's been just a very good working relationship, but not only a working relationship, friendships as well. So I just appreciate having you guys here on the backyard with K-State. It's so good to have you here and be able to just drop by and have a coffee sometime and just keep this relationship. And so if I didn't say this yet in this podcast, that's probably what I want to finish up with.
All right. Well, Romulo, thank you very much. It's our pleasure to have you in Kansas. It's been quite the journey for you from South America to North America, but we're glad to have you here in Kansas, and I'm sure we'll have you back on this podcast to talk a little bit more seriously about some wheat research and wheat extension item. Thank you very much, Romulo. Wheat's on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. If you have questions or comments about this podcast or suggestions for topics to cover, please email us at podcast@kswheat.com. This is Aaron Harries. Thanks for joining us.